Pemberton, turn around.
What is this? You cannot just walk into an open house.
For 13 years, Latonia Marquise Aldridge Pemberton was the agent Prince George's County first-time buyers called when they finally had enough saved for a down payment. What you're about to see destroys that reputation forever.
Down payment assistance, you sold your buyers to steal their closing money. Every wire
Documented
transfer
by who?
document.
You don't have the
23
authority
clients, the LLC, the Mitchellville Bill, the Mercedes, all of it.
By the end of the month, 23 Prince George's County families would know her name in a way they had never wanted to. $174 million in lifetime savings, wire transfers, and inheritance, most of it gathered over decades, dollar by careful dollar, had been routed through one woman's LLC in less than 3 years. The Saturday morning voice on the radio that had taught them about earnest money, FHA loans, and closing costs had been emptying their accounts the entire time. Federal agents had a flash drive, a title company employee already cooperating, and a single attorney's listserv post that had stitched it all together in 28 days. Before we go any further, I have to ask, have you ever wired a large sum of money to someone you trusted because a professional told you to? Drop a comment and tell me what that felt like. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do it now. We expose this kind of professional betrayal every single week, and the stories the mainstream press won't touch are the ones we go after first. Latonia Marquise Aldridge Pemberton was born in the District of Columbia in 1981, the second of 3 daughters in a family that had migrated north from Halifax County, North Carolina, in the early 1970s as part of the last wave of the Great Migration. Her father drove a city bus for WMATA for 31 years. Her mother worked the registration desk at a Howard University medical office and later as a school secretary at a public elementary school in Northeast D.C. The family moved across the district line into Prince George's County in 1989, settling first in Capitol Heights and later in a small brick rambler in Seat Pleasant. The mortgage on that rambler was the proudest accomplishment in her parents' lives, and Latonia grew up hearing the story of its purchase the way other children grow up hearing fairy tales. She attended Suitland High School, where she ran track and joined the business club, and graduated in 1999 in the upper third of her class. She did 2 years at Prince George's Community College before transferring to Bowie State University, where she finished a bachelor's degree in business administration in 2004 with a 3.1 GPA. Her first job after college was as a leasing consultant at an apartment community off Central Avenue. She earned $28,000 a year plus small lease-up bonuses, learned to read a credit report, learned how renters became buyers, and learned, most importantly, how scared most working people were of every form they had to sign. She filed away that lesson and used it later in ways no one who knew her then could have imagined. She got her Maryland real estate license in 2011 at age 30, after 2 years of part-time night classes while she was pregnant with her second child. Her first brokerage was a small independent shop in Largo that paid 60% splits and provided almost no training. She closed 4 houses her first year, 12 her second, 21 her third. By 2014, she had been recruited into the Prince George's County office of one of the national brand brokerages, and her trajectory began to look like the kind of career that gets written up in trade magazines. She earned the National Association of Realtors Accredited Buyers Representative designation in 2015. Her broker's annual performance review that year called her, and these are the exact words, naturally trusted by first-time buyers, especially those from underserved communities, with an instinctive grasp of FHA underwriting. Her broker meant it as a compliment. It was also a description of the specific machinery she would later weaponize. She married her husband, a federal employee at the National Institutes of Health in Bethesda, in 2008. They had 2 children, a son born in 2009 and a daughter born in 2011. They lived in a 4-bedroom colonial in Bowie that they had bought in 2013 for $390,000. They were members of an established Prince George's County congregation. They were the family at the cookout that all the cousins envied without resenting. They were the example, in her parents' Seat Pleasant neighborhood, of where the work had been pointed all along. By By 2019, she was doing somewhere between 40 and 50 transactions a year, almost all of them buyer side, almost all of them first-time buyers in the $85,000 to $400,000 price range. Her client base was overwhelmingly Black, overwhelmingly Prince George's County, and overwhelmingly working its way out of the renter class into home ownership for the first generation in the family. She knew their fears because she had been them 10 years earlier. She knew their savings habits because she had asked. She knew the exact moment in the closing process when a new buyer stopped reading the documents and just signed where the agent's finger landed. The Saturday morning radio segment started in 2020. The station was a regional AM/FM property with a heavily Black audience in the D.C., Maryland, and Northern Virginia listening area, and the format was talk and gospel mixed with community programming. Her segment ran for 30 minutes every Saturday from 9 to 9:30. It was called First Time Buyer Saturday. She walked listeners through earnest money deposits, FHA debt-to-income ratios, the difference between pre-qualification and pre-approval, what a HUD-1 settlement statement actually said, and, in the segment that would eventually be played back to a federal grand jury, the importance of only wiring funds to instructions you have verified in person with your agent. Understand the system she lived inside. In Maryland, a real estate agent is licensed by the Maryland Real Estate Commission. The Commission's oversight model is, in its core architecture, complaint-driven. The Commission does not run continuous automated audits of the financial movements that pass through agent-controlled entities. It waits for someone, a buyer, a seller, a competing agent, a title company, to file a written complaint, and then it investigates that specific complaint as a discrete matter. Each complaint sits in its own file. Each complaint is, structurally, an isolated grievance. The agency had no built-in mechanism for noticing that the same agent's name appeared on 12 different files in 18 months because the files did not talk to each other. Understand the brokerage layer. The national brand brokerage she was affiliated with operated, like most large brokerages, on a commission-based supervisory model. The managing broker reviewed transactions for compliance with state regulations, but the review focused on signature blocks, agency disclosure forms, and lead paint disclosures. There was no formal pre-closing audit of earnest money deposit instructions. There was no formal post-closing audit of escrow holdback distributions. The wire instructions a buyer received were trusted to be whatever the agent or the title company said they were. The brokerage trusted the title company. The title company trusted the agent. The buyer trusted everyone, because the buyer had never been through this before. Understand the title company layer. In Prince George's County, as in most of the country, the title company handles the actual transfer of funds at closing. It accepts wire instructions, it verifies them only as far as its own internal procedures require, and it disperses funds according to those instructions. In some cases, it relies on the agent to relay updated wire instructions from the buyer. In one case in particular, and this is the case that would eventually become Count 41, a title company employee named Jacqueline Tate Holcomb had begun knowingly accepting altered wire instructions from Aldridge Pemberton in exchange for a percentage of the diverted funds, paid to her in cash in the parking lot of a Bowie diner. The trust architecture of a Maryland real estate transaction for a first-time buyer was simple. The agent represented the buyer's interests. The wire instructions were trusted because the agent provided them. The escrow holdback was trusted because the title company handled it. There was no fourth party watching. There was no auditor in the room. For 13 years, the system had worked because the agents inside it were, by and large, not stealing. The moment one of them began to steal in a sustained way, there was nothing built into the system to detect it. The first known fraudulent transaction in the federal indictment is dated January 18, 2022. A buyer named Tasha Vereen, a 28-year-old healthcare administrative assistant pursuing her first home, a starter rancher in Capitol Heights priced at $245,000, wired what she believed to be her $3,000 earnest money deposit to the title company on a Tuesday afternoon. The wire instructions she used had been emailed to her the night before by Aldridge Pemberton from an address that matched the agent's normal brokerage email signature down to the gray tone logo. The instructions routed the wire to an LLC named Carolina Heritage Holdings, registered in Delaware in November 2021, with a mailing address that was a UPS store box in Largo, Maryland. The signatory on the account was Latanya M. Aldridge Pemberton, $3,000, the smallest single diversion in the entire indictment, the seed transaction, the proof of concept. The wire cleared on a Tuesday. By Friday, she had spent it on a payment on a leased BMW her husband did not yet know about. The scheme escalated in 3 distinct lines, and they ran concurrently for 2.5 years. Line 1 was the earnest money deposit diversions. When a buyer was ready to make an offer, Aldridge Pemberton sent them wire instructions that routed their EMD to Carolina Heritage Holdings instead of the title company's escrow account. The fraud usually came to light at closing, when the title company asked where the EMD was. In some cases, she covered the gap by paying the EMD out of her own pocket from later diversions, salvaging the closing and keeping the buyer in the dark. In other cases, the deal collapsed, and the buyer was told by Aldridge Pemberton that the wire had been intercepted by a fraudulent actor pretending to be the title company, a story so close to the truth it had a strange shimmer to it. Multiple buyers, after their deals collapsed, paid her additional money for help investigating the original fraud. Line 2 was the down payment assistance misrepresentation. This is the line that fed on the radio segment. A listener would hear her describe FHA programs and Maryland Mortgage Program assistance on a Saturday morning. The listener would call the station's tip line, would be patched through, would book a buyer consultation. At the second or third meeting, after she had built the trust, Aldridge Pemberton would tell the buyer that there was an additional layer of buyer-only down payment assistance, a private grant program she had access to as an accredited buyer's representative, requiring a fee that would be reimbursed at closing. The fees ranged from $14,000 to $84,000. The grant program did not exist. Line 3 was the post-closing repair fund diversion. When a home inspection turned up repair items that the seller agreed to address through a closing table escrow holdback, those funds, sometimes $30,000, sometimes $70,000, were supposed to sit in escrow at the title company and be released to repair vendors. Aldridge Pemberton convinced multiple buyers that her brokerage offered a free repair concierge service that would manage the holdback and pay vendors directly. The buyers signed a release moving the funds to Carolina Heritage Holdings. The vendors were never paid. The repairs were never made. In 3 cases, the buyers eventually lost the homes to foreclosure inside 18 months because they had no liquidity to address roof or HVAC failures the holdback was supposed to have covered. The diversions escalated in size as the scheme matured. The early EMD frauds were $3,000 to $5,000 each. By mid-2023, she was diverting $25,000 earnest money deposits on more expensive properties. By early 2024, she was structuring expedited closing wires of $100,000 and up, persuading buyers that closing in 7 days instead of 30 required wiring funds to her LLC for facilitation rather than to the title company. The signs were there for anyone willing to look. Her household spending had visibly outpaced her commission income for 2 years. She had paid $620,000 cash down on a $1.4 million custom-built home in Mitchellville in October 2023. She had bought an $88,000 Mercedes GLE for cash. She was paying her son's private high school tuition. She was sending her mother $2,800 a month. Her brokerage's managing broker, when later interviewed by the FBI, said he had assumed she was doing very well, like the top producers do. Stories like this don't get the coverage they deserve, because the victims aren't famous and the perpetrator wore the right clothes to the closing table. If you want to see more of these cases brought into daylight, subscribe and turn the notifications on. The next part of this story is where the architecture of trust she built starts to collapse. And the way it collapses started with one single email from one attorney who had never met the others. Carlos Devontre Reuter was 31 years old when he first called the station tip line on a Saturday morning in October 2023. He was a Prince George's County public school teacher with 7 years in the system, an apartment in Hyattsville, a girlfriend he was planning to propose to, and 12 years of carefully assembled savings, totaling just over $230,000. The savings were partly his own salary, partly a small inheritance from a grandmother in North Carolina who had passed in 2019, partly a settlement from a car accident in 2018. The savings were the entirety of his liquid net worth. He had been listening to First Time Buyer Saturday for 9 months. He believed the woman on the radio understood his situation better than anyone else he could have hired. He walked into her brokerage office on a Tuesday afternoon in November 2023. By February 2024, they had identified a townhouse in Largo at a list price of $395,000. By early March 2024, in a series of phone calls and one face-to-face meeting at a coffee shop in Bowie, she persuaded him that the seller required a 14-day expedited closing, and that, to make that timeline work, he should wire the bulk of his closing funds directly to a brokerage-controlled escrow at Carolina Heritage Holdings, rather than wait for the title company's slower internal process. The amount she requested was $214,000. She emailed him wire instructions from what appeared to be her brokerage account, including a PDF letter on what appeared to be brokerage letterhead. He wired $214,000 on March 7, 2024, at 11:47 a.m. from his credit union. He received a confirmation email that afternoon, thanking him for his prompt facilitation of the expedited timeline. The closing was scheduled for March 21st. March 21st came and went. No closing. He called Aldridge Pemberton. She returned the call 36 hours later, apologetic, citing a delay on the title side and a need to reschedule to early April. Early April passed, then mid-April. By April 22nd, she had stopped returning his calls within 24 hours. By April 29th, she was not returning them at all. On May 2nd, he drove to her brokerage office unannounced, was told she was out showing a property, and was given a generic apology by the receptionist. On May 14, 2024, he sat in the small Beltsville office of an attorney named Stephanie Whitlock Hannibal. He had been referred to her by a cousin who had used her for a landlord-tenant matter the previous year. He walked her through the file he had assembled, the wire confirmation, the brokerage letterhead PDF, the email thread, his texts. Whitlock Hannibal listened without interrupting for 45 minutes. When he was done, she did not say what he expected her to say. She did not say it was a routine fraud. She did not say it was unrecoverable. What she said was, "I have heard a piece of this story before. Give me 2 weeks." What she had heard 6 months earlier was a single offhand comment from another attorney at a continuing education seminar. A comment about an agent in Prince George's County who had a strange relationship to wire instructions. She had filed the comment away. She remembered it the moment Carlos Reuter said the agent's name. The Maryland Bar maintains a number of listservs by practice area. Whitlock Hannibal subscribed to a real estate and consumer protection list with a few hundred active subscribers, most of them small firm and solo attorneys around the state. On May 17, 2024, she posted a short message. The message did not name Aldridge Pemberton. It described a fact pattern: an independent buyer's agent operating in Prince George's County, working with first-time black middle-class buyers, with a pattern of inserting an agent-controlled LLC into wire instructions for earnest money deposits, down payment assistance, and post-closing repair holdbacks. She asked simply whether anyone else had seen this. The first response came at 8:43 the next morning from a solo practitioner in Upper Marlboro. The second came at 11:02, the third at 1:14 that afternoon. By Friday, she had 4 responses. By the following Friday, she had 6. By June 14th, 28 days after the post, she had 8 separate responses from 8 separate Maryland attorneys, each describing a client matter with the same agent, the same LLC, the same general structure. Cumulative claimed losses across the 8 attorneys' clients exceeded $1,200,000. This is the smoking gun, not the listserv post by itself, the comparison. The Maryland Real Estate Commission had been receiving complaints against Aldridge Pemberton intermittently since late 2022. The complaints had been filed individually by individual buyers, often without attorney representation. Each complaint had been opened as a discrete file, investigated as a discrete matter, and in some cases administratively closed for lack of clear pattern. The Commission had never aggregated them. A single bar listserv post in May 2024 aggregated more of them in 28 days than the state regulator had aggregated in 28 months. Whitlock Hannibal coordinated a joint complaint package. She filed it with the Maryland Real Estate Commission, the Maryland Office of the Attorney General Consumer Protection Division, and the FBI Baltimore Field Office on the same Friday in late June 2024. The federal nexus was wire fraud. The Bureau accepted the case on July 8th. 2 special agents and a forensic accountant from the Baltimore Field Office were assigned. The forensic accountant pulled bank records for Carolina Heritage Holdings going back to its formation in November 2021. The records told a story so clean it almost did not need narration. The records showed deposits totaling $1.74 million from 23 identifiable buyer source wires between January 2022 and August 2024. They showed outbound transfers in the same period totaling $620,000 to the closing attorney for the Mitchellville home, $88,000 to a Mercedes-Benz dealership in Bethesda, $142,000 to a vendor supplying restaurant equipment to her husband's small business investment, $48,000 to a private high school in Upper Marlboro, monthly transfers averaging $2,300 to an account in her mother's name, and approximately $420,000 in incremental retail, travel, and household spending. There was no exculpatory pattern. There were no offsetting business expenses. There was no plausible legitimate explanation for any single transfer, let alone all of them together. The forensic accountant also identified Jacqueline Tate Holcomb, a title company processor at an affiliated PG County title firm, whose pattern of approving wire instruction changes from Aldridge Pemberton without secondary verification, appeared on 12 of the 23 identified transactions. Tate Holcomb was approached separately by the Bureau in mid-August. She agreed to cooperate within 48 hours. It was a Wednesday morning, September 11th, 2024. 8:22 a.m. Aldridge Pemberton was in the kitchen of her Mitchellville home in workout clothes, a charcoal long sleeve, leggings, sneakers, about to leave for a 9 o'clock appointment to walk a new buyer through a property in Brandywine. The doorbell rang. Through the side window of her front door, she saw 2 men in business casual coats and a third figure behind them. Her hand went to her chest before her brain caught up. She opened the door. Special Agent Dwight Whitford of the FBI Baltimore Field Office held up his credentials. His partner, Special Agent Raina Calderon Westbrook, stood behind him. A Prince George's County uniformed officer waited at the bottom of the porch steps. Whitford said her name. She said, "What is this about?" Whitford, "Ma'am, we have a federal arrest warrant in your name. We need you to step out onto the porch." She did not move. "A warrant for what?" Calderon Westbrook. "Wire fraud, money laundering, and related charges. We can go through the specifics down at the field office. Right now, we need you to step out." She looked back over her shoulder into the house. Her son was upstairs. Her daughter was in the kitchen. Her husband had left for NIH 40 minutes earlier. She looked at the agents, and her face did something specific. The specific thing the face of someone who has been preparing for this moment for 2 years does when the moment arrives. Not surprise, recognition. She said, "Carolina Heritage." Whitford, "Ma'am," she said, "I am asking if this is about Carolina Heritage Holdings." Whitford did not answer that question. He said, "Ma'am, please step out onto the porch. I am going to ask you one more time." She stepped out. Calderon Westbrook informed her of the warrant. The uniformed officer placed her in handcuffs on her own front porch in front of her azalea bushes. Her daughter came to the foyer in pajamas and froze. Aldridge Pemberton said, looking back over her shoulder at her daughter. "Call your father. Tell him not to come home. Tell him to call Marcus." Marcus was her attorney. Her daughter did not move. They walked her down the porch steps to the unmarked vehicle in the driveway. She did not say another word until she was inside the Baltimore field office, and then she said only, "I want my lawyer." The federal indictment was unsealed in the United States District Court for the District of Maryland 3 days later, on September 14th, 2024. The charges, as filed, 18 counts of wire fraud under 18 U.S.C., paragraph 1343, 4 counts of money laundering under 18 U.S.C., paragraph 1956, 1 count of bank fraud under 18 U.S.C., paragraph 1344, relating to the Mitchellville mortgage application that had failed to disclose the LLC's contribution as a loan from a related party, 1 count of aggravated identity theft under 18 U.S.C., paragraph 1028A, relating to her use of a buyer's personal information to facilitate a wire, and 1 count of conspiracy under 18 U.S.C., paragraph 371, with respect to Jacqueline Tate Holcomb. 25 counts total. The total maximum statutory exposure, stacked, exceeded 400 years. She pleaded not guilty at her arraignment. Her attorney, Marcus Beaumont, of a small criminal defense firm in Greenbelt, began plea negotiations almost immediately with the United States Attorney's Office. By late 2024, the contours of a likely plea agreement had emerged. She would plead to a reduced subset of counts, would cooperate against Tate Holcomb, who had already pleaded, would consent to a forfeiture order against the Mitchellville home, the Mercedes, and the LLC's remaining accounts, and would agree to a restitution figure in the neighborhood of $1.74 million. The expected sentencing range under the United States Sentencing Guidelines, with the enhancements for amount of loss, number of victims, and abuse of a position of trust, was somewhere between 151 and 188 months, approximately 12.5 to 15.5 years in federal prison. The Maryland Real Estate Commission revoked her real estate license on October 14, 2024, in a single-page order. The order did not mention any of the names. It listed her license number, the dates of violation, the statutory provisions violated, and the effective date of revocation. The order was 3 paragraphs long. The actual content of what she had done, the names and faces and savings of 23 families, appeared nowhere in it. The civil case was filed in early 2025. The 23 buyers, coordinated by a consortium of the 8 attorneys who had answered the listserv post, plus 3 more who joined later, brought suit against Aldridge Pemberton individually, against Carolina Heritage Holdings, and against the national brand brokerage that had affiliated her, under theories of agent supervisory liability and respondent superior. The brokerage settled in March 2025 for a total aggregate amount in the high 7 figures, separate from any criminal restitution, separate from any pending NAR ethics action, distributed across the 23 families on the basis of documented loss. Several of the families received their first liquid funds back almost exactly 2 years after their original wires had cleared. Carlos Reuter received approximately $191,000 of his $214,000 back between the brokerage settlement and a partial recovery from the forfeited LLC funds. By the time it landed in his account, the townhouse in Largo he had been trying to buy had been sold to someone else for $41,000 more than the price he had offered. He bought a different townhouse in Glenarden in late 2025. At his federal victim impact reading, he said, into the microphone, looking past his attorney and directly at the woman seated in the orange jumpsuit at the defense table, "I listened to you every Saturday morning for 9 months. You taught me how to do this. Then you taught yourself how to take it from me." The sentencing hearing was held in February 2025 before United States District Judge Imani Forsyth Lockwood. The courtroom held 17 of the 23 affected buyers. 6 had not come. 3 of the 6 had lost their homes to subsequent foreclosure in the intervening months and could not bring themselves to be in the same room. Judge Forsyth Lockwood, before announcing the sentence, addressed the defendant directly. The transcript records what she said. The judge said, "Ms. Aldridge Pemberton, the offense before this court is not, fundamentally, a financial crime. It is a betrayal of representation. You were licensed by the state of Maryland for 13 years to act as the agent of buyers, to stand between them and a process designed to extract money from them. You used that license, that designation, and a weekly broadcast on a station serving the very community whose trust you cultivated, to do the opposite of what your license required. You did not steal from strangers. You stole from people who had specifically chosen you to protect them. This court has presided over fraud sentencings for 16 years, and I am rarely asked to address a defendant whose victims were so precisely and deliberately selected for their inability to detect the fraud. The judge continued. I have read the 23 victim impact statements. I have read the one from Mr. Reuter twice. I have read the one from Mrs. Yvette Castile, who lost her late mother's inheritance to your earnest money diversion, twice. I am required by the Sentencing Reform Act to weigh deterrence and rehabilitation alongside punishment. I have weighed them. The sentence I impose today is, by the terms of the guidelines and the totality of the harm before me, a measured one. The sentence, 168 months, 14 years, plus 3 years of supervised release, plus restitution in the amount of $1,743,800, plus forfeiture of the Mitchellville home, the Mercedes, and the contents of the Carolina Heritage Holdings accounts. She is currently incarcerated at FCI Aliceville, a low-security federal correctional institution in Aliceville, Alabama, designated for female offenders. Her projected release date is in November 2037. She will be 56 years old when she is released. Her daughter will be 26. Her son will be 28. The case was cited in 2025 National Association of Realtors Ethics Training Materials as the benchmark case for buyer-agent fraud risk. The Maryland Real Estate Commission, in a public statement issued in March 2025, announced a review of its complaint aggregation procedures and pledged to implement an internal pattern matching protocol across complaints involving the same licensee. The Saturday morning home ownership segment on the regional Black audience radio station was discontinued in October 2024 and replaced 6 weeks later with a financial literacy show hosted by a different licensed agent. The new host opens every episode by telling listeners, in the same time slot, never to wire funds based on emailed instructions alone. The line is now in the script. This case was layered, but the case on the right-hand side took a different kind of trust and broke it in a way you almost cannot believe a person would do.